In 2011, 3 men mysteriously disappeared in Massachusetts. It wasn't long before the police uncovered everything. This is the case of Caius Veiovis. Hello, friend, and welcome to High Time Crime. My name's Joel, and on here I specialize in true crime and also extreme sports. I'm extreme! But today, we're going over the case of Caius Veiovis. You're going to learn about what it's like to be a vampire. For our story, we're heading to Berkshire County, Massachusetts. With a population of around 129,000 people, it sits on the western edge of the state and was founded in 1761. The residents here are known as Berkshirites, and I think that's awesome. We need to start naming more people by where they live. Originally, the Mohican Native American tribe lived in the area up until the 18th century when the first English settlers and frontiersmen arrived, and they started to set up farms and homesteads. On April 25th of 1724, the English finally paid the tribes 460 pounds, 3 barrels of cider, and 30 quarts of rum for what is known today as Berkshire County. During the 19th century, Berkshire became popular with what's known as the American elites, aka people who think that they're better than others because they have more money. They're not. But they built a ton of cottages throughout the countryside, and as the 20th century came in, many of them were either torn or burned down. Some of them, however, became prep schools, historic sites, and also bed and breakfast inns. Who doesn't love a good waffle? If you ever happen to travel to the county, I hope you have a lot of fun. You could visit the Tanglewood, which is a music venue, and also the summer home of the Boston Symphony Orchestra. Believe it or not, I was actually the main composer of a huge symphony for a very long time. Haha. Long story, but that's for another day. You could take a trip to the Norman Rockwell Museum, which was founded in 1969, and see a ton of beautiful paintings. Or if you're feeling a hike, you could go to Monument Mountain and see some spectacular views. I can smell the trees from here. But that's not why we're in town today. Caius Domitius Veiovis was originally born Roy Cornell Gutfinski Jr. sometime in 1980. He was immediately given up for adoption, but taken in by Roy Gutfinski Sr. and his wife Trina. He had 2 sisters that were also adopted, and they were all raised on Christianity. Not too much is known about his early childhood, but I did find something interesting that's sad but could definitely set the tone for what transpires after. When Roy was just a boy, about 11-ish, he was an altar server for the man in the picture, Father John E. Bellefontaine. During this period of time, there was another priest named John Leon Shorty who would eventually be laicized by the Vatican in 2006 after it was found that he was many young boys in various parishes in Maine. One of those boys was Roy Jr., and from this point forward started Roy's downward spiral of rejection of the Lord, Satanism, drugs, and overall just self-destruction. Roy began indulging himself in the culture of Satanism and would be described by outsiders as either gothic or emo. Apparently, he started digging up graves and boiling the skulls of people. He began eating maggots and also would murder people's pets. Classic serial killer vibes. Roy had started to get used to getting in trouble with the police at a pretty young age. His first time getting arrested was at the age of 13 because he was carrying a knife and he was also with the occult. He told the police that this is because he's a vampire and he also worships the devil. One time, he went to a juvenile detention facility and a nun had told him that he was a psycho and evil and that he'd grow up to be a murderer. Not only is she a nun, but she's also a psychic. Roy went to Gardner High School in Gardner, Maine, and he graduated in the class of 1998. About a year later, on August 21st of 1999, when he was 19 years old, he would run in with the law yet again. He was dating a 16-year-old named Deanne Jones, and he also had his own apartment. Inside resembled that of a dungeon. There were bones scattered around, pictures of bodies on the walls, and razor blades all throughout the apartment. There was also a library book on human anatomy under a fish tank that was home to a snake, and also an axe near a wooden chair. I'm not sure what he was doing for a job or anything like that. The information is pretty scarce. But basically what happened is that Roy and Deanne invited a 17-year-old girl over for a blood-drinking ritual. You know, just normal teenage things. Deanne testified that she cut the other girl across her back with a razor, and then her and Roy drank the blood together while kissing. The police learned about this after the 17-year-old girl went to the emergency room and had to get 32 stitches. Both her and Deanne testified that Roy was in the room, but he was oblivious to what was going on. He was just listening to music. A justice, however, said that Roy still played a huge role. He's quoted as saying, "Roy was the host. He was the dominant player. 2 or 3 years older and unambiguously the person to charge. He was a promoter and the believer of a concept of cutting others and drinking their blood." The 17-year-old said that she didn't want to press charges and thought that Roy should not be imprisoned once the incident came to light. Deanne pleaded guilty to elevated aggravated assault and was ordered to serve a year in jail plus 6 years of probation. Roy was convicted on July 3rd of 2000 for elevated aggravated assault and reckless conduct, and was ordered to serve a 10-year sentence with 4 years probation. He was then diagnosed with a series of diseases: antisocial personality disorder, bipolar, borderline personality disorder, self-mutilation, identity disorder, impulsivity, and dissociation. While in jail, in 2003 to be exact, he started a petition to change his name. He tried to get a court judge to approve a name change to Zaid Trash Horror. Wow. What a name. In a letter he wrote to the judge, he described himself as a religious Satanist and said this: "I wish to shed all ties with the Christian church, and one important step toward that goal is legally changing my name." This petition failed, and the judge did not approve it. Roy ended up serving a 7.5-year sentence, but he ended up going back to jail multiple times for violating probation. Some of those incidents involved getting charged with criminal misconduct, such as this one. The time he was charged with kidnapping in 2006 for allegedly holding 2 employees of the Foxy Lady, a New Bedford strip club, against their will. The 2 women called police from a motel bathroom after Caius and an accomplice shed their clothing, started snorting pixie dust, and refused to let them leave. The kidnapping charges were later dismissed, but he was convicted of a Mary Jane possession. This violated his probation. Sometime around here, as I just want to throw this in too, he also had a son named Jack Hell Gutfinski. Yes, he named his child's middle name Hell, but he would then serve 3.5 more years in prison for violating probation, and he got released in April of 2010. In 2008, however, he petitioned yet again to change his name, but this time to Caius Domitius Veovis. He wrote to a judge yet again, and this time said, "Adopted as a child, I have no blood relation with, nor do I share the nationality my given name implies. It has long been a burden for me, and I feel the new name I have carefully, and with much thought, chosen more justly represents my individuality and nationality. This name is also in keeping with my religious beliefs." His first and middle names were inspired by the great Roman emperors Caligula and Nero, and his last name is from an ancient Etruscan demon. Originally, many people believed that his name change was inspired by Twilight, but he said that isn't true, and we'll go over that a little bit later. This time though, he was allowed to change it, and so Caius is what we'll call him from here on out. He started to alter his appearance a little bit. He got small horns that appeared as bumps implanted into his forehead. He filed his teeth down, got his earlobes reshaped, got horns implanted into his septum, and even had 666 tattooed onto his forehead, along with a bunch of other tattoos. Okay, he really changed his appearance. He became the lead singer of a band named Deadhole and went by Veovis the Defiler. Here's a snippet of that. Honestly, the cover art looks pretty sick. He's a pretty talented dude. Caius seemed to start doing pretty good for himself. I don't know when, but he decided to move to Massachusetts. He then got a job working for a company called Grant Larkin High-End Interior, and garden design. He was hired by the owner, Matthew Larkin, and Matthew considered him to be an artist because he would make topiary forms from the sketches he was given. Caius was a studio assistant that helped fabricate lighting and furniture. He had to use cutting tools, welders, and also glass cutting tools, and while he would do this, he had to wear latex gloves. He worked from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m., 5 days a week, and never missed any days. Matthew also had a gardener that worked at his house named Abigail Elwood. Her and Caius would eventually hit it off in about July of 2011. Matthew helped out Caius a lot, not only with finding a girlfriend, but he even helped him buy a Jeep in late August of that same year. He gave Caius a loan, and they put together a payment plan. Abigail said that Caius had another world, which she meant friends with whom she did not socialize with. What she meant by this is how we get to our next part of the story. We're about to introduce a lot more people, and specifically the ringleader. Caius wasn't particularly the greatest person, so it's only right that he'd hang out with people either just as bad as he was or worse. In August, a lot of things were happening for him. He just got a Jeep, he met some new friends, and he was also 33 years old. He really wanted to be a part of the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club, which is a worldwide outlaw motorcycle club whose members typically ride Harley Davidsons. He'd often be seen wearing a vest with their insignias on the front of it. On his Jeep and all throughout his apartment, he had multiple stickers supporting the club. But those new people he started to hang out with were named David Shalhoub and Adam Lee, or Leo Hall. David was born on December 12th of 1966, and he was a construction worker and 44 years old at the time. He was a member of the Aryan Brotherhood, which is the nation's oldest major white supremacist gang. He was also a member of their local Hells Angels Club. He had a difficult upbringing and spent most of his adult life locked up. In 2002, he was released, and 9 years later, he'd meet Caius Veiovis and Adam Lee Hall. Adam is who we're going to consider the ringleader in all of this, even though he's pretty dumb. He was 37 years old and was a sergeant at arms of their local's Hells Angels Club. He was a malicious man with ill intent aimed at every angle he had. He would take advantage of younger women and people with disabilities. Adam had a 5-year-old son at the time with a woman named Brittany Beggs, but that part of his life he didn't really care about. He believed he was a modern gangster and did heinous things to those who he thought crossed him. This is where a man named David Glasser comes into play. David was 44 years old at the time, and he had a 58-year-old roommate named Edward Frampton. They shared an apartment together in Pittsfield, and both of them suffered from moderate developmental disabilities. They were issued assistance by the state, but were known to be pretty independent. David was estranged from his family at a young age and really didn't have many people that supported him and loved him in that way. He did have a woman named Donna Randolph in his life, however, who he looked up to and called Mom. But he owned a pickup truck and did odd jobs around town, or he would give people rides for some money. A couple times a week, he would also sell scrap metal to Perlman Scrap Yard, and in mid-July of 2009, he sold some wire and motor parts, specifically a carburetor. A customer of the scrapyard recognized that some of the parts looked like they belonged to Adam. And so Adam went to the shop and he bought the parts back. This part confuses me because, how do you recognize what car parts are yours? Were they looking for them because they knew that they had been stolen or something? I really have no idea. I don't know what happened here, but it's bizarre. David occasionally did odd jobs at Adam's house, and I suppose that's how they became familiar with each other. Adam believed that David stole the parts from him, and so he confronted David on July 21st of 2009. He hit him with a baseball bat and made him sign over the title to his truck. Then he made David drive himself to Berkshire Medical Center in Adam's Hummer. When he got out, Adam said that if he ever went to the police, he would be killed. Adam then went and sold the truck at a local car lot. This guy makes me so mad. What a piece of shit. He told the salesman, whose name was Earl Persip, that it belonged to someone that owed him money. When Earl later found out what Adam did, he returned the truck to David and demanded that Adam give him his money back. While David was at the hospital, a state trooper came and took a statement from him. He later went down to the state police barracks and was interviewed again. He asked whether or not the state police had a witness protection program because he was afraid of Adam retaliating against him. The police said no, and so they escorted him out and they told him, if anything further happens, just contact us. Man, it sucks how many times we hear this statement while listening to these type of stories, doesn't it? There's gotta be something. There's just gotta be something that can be done. 2 days later, David went in for another interview, and this time he received a phone call from Adam, who was threatening him. Adam was arrested that day, and the police recovered the baseball bat from his vehicle. 3 months later, however, he was released on a $50,000 bond. He had an upcoming trial with drug, gun, and assault charges that was him versus David. Adam had nothing but vengeance on his mind, and he wasn't going to stop until he got his. On September 30th of 2009, he posted bond and he got out of jail. He then tried to recruit an ex-girlfriend named Alicia to go to New York with him and pin a charge on David. Thankfully, she refused. Then again in late 2009, David asked another ex-girlfriend named Justina to try and frame David for. Thankfully, she refused. Fast forward about 6 months, and in July of 2010, Adam asked his friend Scott Langdon to offer David $3,000 to drop the charges. David refused. Afterwards, Adam wrote a message to his friend Steven and asked him if he could say that David stole scrap metal out of his yard. Steven refused. Adam then asked a woman named Ocean to set up David, and thankfully, she refused. But there's always that one idiot that agrees to a terrible plan. We're still in July of 2010, and Adam asks one of his many girlfriends, Nicole Brooks, to hire David to drive her to upstate New York and report that he kidnapped her. She thought that it was a stupid idea, but agreed to do it anyway. Adam recruited Steve Langdon, Teresa Cunningham, and Alexandra Ellie, one of his girlfriends, to assist in the plan. Okay, maybe there were 4 idiots that agreed to a terrible plan. On August 13th, the group met and together they refined the plan. On August 11th or 12th, Adam showed Nicole a handgun and he then drove with her to a rest area in upstate New York. Here, he fired the gun at a few trees. His plan was to plant the gun in David's truck, and then he wanted Nicole to show the police the bullet holes in the trees. Adam told Steve to hire David to drive him to Wells, New York, which was near the rest area. Once David dropped Steve off, Nicole would then report the kidnapping. Adam gave Nicole David's license plate number, and he showed her his picture so she could identify him. The next morning, on August 14th, it was time to try and hatch their plan. Adam drove Nicole to the Price Chopper Superstore to cash a check, and afterwards they met up with Alexandra. He then took her wallet, which had no money but had receipts and IDs. He filled up a bag with a gun and her wallet. Afterwards, he put the bag underneath of Nicole's seat. Steve then had David pick him up to drive him to Wells. Nicole drove herself there while Adam and Alexandra followed in a separate car. On the way, Adam, Nicole, and Steve spoke on the phone and agreed to meet at a gas station with a convenience store. When Nicole pulled in and saw David's truck parked in the back, she knew that it was time to strike. She removed the bag from underneath of her seat. She put it into a backpack and then she walked inside of the store. Steve was inside and she talked to him for a second and he told her to hide it in the bathroom. She did this and then she left. Steve then went into the bathroom and retrieved the bag, and then he got into David's truck and put it behind his driver's seat. A few minutes go by and David dropped Steve off at Wells and he left. Nicole drove to the rest area and Adam and Alexandra pulled in and picked up her car and then they left. Nicole then went to a friend's house and reported the kidnapping to the police. The next morning, on August 15th, she was brought down to the police station for questioning. She was given a photo array of possible suspects and she chose David's photograph. She then showed the police the rest area where this all allegedly took place. The next day, on August 16th, the police in Pittsfield stopped David and searched his truck. They found the bag that was planted and he was immediately arrested. He was very confused about what was happening and had no idea what was going on. The police then searched his home and they found printed and handwritten notes with directions on how to get from Pittsfield to Wells. They then started to doubt Nicole's story, and David said that he was framed. Officers from the Western Massachusetts Gang Task Force suggested to the investigators working the case that Adam most likely did frame David. The officers began investigating even further and looked into surveillance video that showed Nicole at the Price Chopper Superstore when she should have been in Wells. They then saw her at the convenience store with Steve Langdon. Afterwards, they obtained phone records that showed Nicole, Adam, Steve, and Alexandra all made a series of calls to each other. The police confronted them, but they continued to lie. They were all arrested and charged in connection with the scheme. While this was all going on, Adam told Nicole that if the plan to frame him failed, he'd have to make him disappear. About a month later, in September, Adam requested a meeting with the FBI. He offered to become an informant against the Hells Angels in exchange for leniency and sentencing for his pending cases. This offer was rejected. About a month later, on November 29th, all of the people that were charged were indicted. Fast forward about 4 months, and Adam was released on a $250,000 bond after the local chapter of the Hells Angels posted his bail. I don't know if they knew what he was up to or if they knew that he was a rat, but I'm not too entirely sure why they helped him. This is where our next part of the story comes in. Now we're back in August of 2011 when Adam started to hang around Caius and David Shalhoub, who we'll refer to as Shalhoub. Shalhoub told Adam not to worry about his pending charges and that everything would be okay and that he wouldn't go to jail. Towards the end of the month, Adam purchased 2 cars, a tan Buick and a purple Hyundai. On Friday, August 26th, Adam picked up an ex-girlfriend of his named Caitlin Carmen. He started dating her when she was 13. 13. And he was in his 30s. Ew. But after they stopped dating, they would remain friends and he would often take her to Hells Angels functions. In the car with him were 2 guys. One she knew as Trash and the other one she knew as Shalhoub. Trash was Caius, but just another alter ego he went by. They all went to various local bars and ended up at the Hells Angels clubhouse in Lee. They went outside and started driving 4-wheelers around, and Adam told them to be careful because he needed Caius and Shalhoub for a job. Later into the night, he went into a tirade about a guy named Drummer Dave who had supposedly robbed and then snitched on him. He said he was going to kill that motherfucker. Either Caius or Shalhoub or both of them responded that it was going to be all right and that you'll get him or we'll get him. Adam started complaining that a guy named David Casey wouldn't give him the keys to his backhoe. David Casey comes into play soon, but there was a lot of Davids involved. Caitlin became nervous about Adam's behavior, and so she called a friend to give her a ride home. Now we're circling back to David Glasser, who Adam had a problem with. On the weekend of August 26th through the 28th of 2011, the tropical storm Irene was forecast to hit western Massachusetts. To celebrate, David, along with his roommate Edward Frampton and their friend Robert Chadwell, were all going to watch the storm. On the 27th, David drove a guy named Andrew to the grocery store, and on the ride there, he expressed some concerns to him. He was afraid about testifying against Adam in the next coming weeks. The court date against Adam was literally only like a month away. They then arranged for David to drive him to work on Monday morning. A woman named Lisa lived upstairs from David and Edward, and at about 3 to 4 in the afternoon, she saw David, Edward, and Robert from across the street. At about 10:30 at night, she asked David if he could move his truck so her mother could park in their shared driveway. He gladly did it, and afterwards, she was still observing them. She noticed a 4th man come into the picture, and she could see them in the kitchen. Sometime after midnight, she started to hear banging from the hallway downstairs. She heard David's, Edward's, and a few other unfamiliar voices. The next morning, on Sunday the 28th, she went downstairs to have David move his truck again, but this time, no one answered. On Monday the 29th, Andrew, the guy David was supposed to give a ride to, stopped by, but once again, no one answered. Then a social worker named Erin Forbush had an appointment scheduled with Edward this same day. She went to work and was surprised that she didn't receive any voicemails from him. She tried to call him, but he didn't answer, and so she went to a shared apartment. She could hear that the TV was on, but once again, no one answered the door. Erin saw that David's truck was still parked out back, and so she returned to the office and tried to call Edward a few more times. She then returned to the apartment with her coworker, Heather. They discovered that the door was unlocked, and they found Edward's cat. Nothing appeared to be out of the ordinary. They found Edward's pill box, but he didn't take his Sunday and Monday pills. They then checked with local hospitals on Tuesday, and with no success, Erin filed a missing persons report on both David and Edward. On Friday, September 9th, the bodies of all 3 men would be discovered, and the police knew exactly who to look for. David Casey, who we mentioned earlier, was a guy who lived in Canaan, New York in August of 2011. He did excavation work and was taking a nap on Sunday the 28th when the storm was supposed to come in. He worked on a pond at Adam's property and also at the Hells Angels clubhouse. Adam randomly arrived at his house and said that he was having car trouble. He then asked if he knew any place nearby where he could park it overnight. Casey called a guy named Alan, who agreed to let him park his car in the driveway. Adam then started talking about how he offed David and a fat guy and an N-word. I really don't like this guy. But he explained how he held David down and pulled the trigger, but the gun didn't fire. So while he was chambering another round, David ran into the woods and Shalou went after him. Shalou shot David, but not fatally, and then Adam yelled, "Hey, he was for me," and so Shalou brought him back. David begged for his life and that he wouldn't testify, but Adam didn't care and shot him anyway. Robert Chadwell didn't initially pass away, and they saw him sitting on a log moaning, and so they tortured him. Adam said that he felt very good about what he did and afterwards slept like a baby. Electric chair. He then asked if Casey had any shovels, and Casey lied and said that he didn't. After that, he asked if he was still working at Dan Cole's property, which was located in nearby Beckett. Casey said he was, and there was an excavator on the property. Adam asked him to dig a hole big enough for a few people. He said he knew that Steve Langdon, who lived with Casey's sister, Teresa Cunningham, was going to testify against him in the kidnapping case. He agreed to leave both of them alone if Casey dug the hole. Casey agreed because he didn't want to be harmed and he did not want to have his family harmed. Adam wanted the hole dug that day, but Casey suggested the next day just in case Cole was home. The next day, on Monday the 29th, after confirming that Cole wasn't home, they jump-started the excavator. The men's bodies were in trash bags in the back of Adam's Buick. Casey drove the excavator to a clearing in a wooded area and dug a hole about 4 feet deep, 4 feet wide, and 8 feet long. Adam transferred a bunch of trash bags from the trunk into the bucket on the excavator. Casey dropped them into the hole and covered them with dirt and large rocks, and then he returned the excavator to its previous spot. Adam then warned Casey to keep his mouth shut and said that he can make things happen even in jail. Daniel Cole came home from work and he noticed fresh muddy tracks leading into the woods. He also noticed that the excavator had mud on its tracks and appeared to have been moved. He asked Casey about this, but Casey denied it. So Cole pressed him and Casey just stared at the ground and shook his head without making any eye contact. This same day, Adam and Shalou brought the Buick to a scrap yard. The guy who processed the car was surprised because it seemed to be in good shape and ran fine. He did notice that the interior carpets were coated with liquid, the back seat was mostly missing, and the carpet that was in the trunk was removed. Later into the day, Hall and Shalou took Alexandra Ellie and a girl named Rose to the Hells Angels clubhouse. Hall and Shalou got really drunk. They acted out a scene where Adam ran from Shalou saying, "No, no, don't," in a high-pitched, scared voice while Shalou pointed a finger at him. Adam then said, "You should have seen the look on his face," and then refers to someone as a slur. I don't even know if hate would be like a strong enough emotion for how I feel about Adam and Shalou. Ugh. On September 4th, the police received a call about a dark-colored Jeep that was driving near the salvage yard. The police located the Jeep and followed it into a gas station. Caius was driving and he went inside of the gas station. The police approached the vehicle and asked one of the occupants to identify themselves. This was David Shalou. He then pointed to Adam and said, "I'm just his friend." Adam said that he knew who the detectives were and that the Jeep belonged to a friend. Caius came out of the gas station, filled his tank up, and got in. When one of the officers asked him his name, he pointed at Adam and said, "I'm with him." So the officers asked what they were doing, and Adam said, "We're checking out the washed out road." I don't know what that exactly means. But the officers asked all three of them to step out of the vehicle, and they then photographed them and patted them down. Caius had a large folding knife and a white box cutter on him, but nobody else had anything. Other officers would soon arrive, and they told the men that they were not under arrest. They then questioned Adam about his boots, which he said that he bought at Walmart. They seized his boots and his socks and all three of the men's phones, and they had the Jeep towed to the police station. The officers let them go, but at about 10:30 later that night, they stopped two cars. One was driving directly behind the other. The car in the front contained Adam, Caius, and a woman named Rose. The car that followed them was Shalou and a woman named Ocean. Adam Hall was then arrested on charges unrelated to the disappearance of the three men. When the police removed Adam and Caius from the car, it rolled forward with Rose in the back seat. A trooper jumped in to stop the car, and he accidentally popped out a magazine from his gun. In the trunk of the car contained a package of tube socks, and a box of latex gloves were inside of the glove box. They arrested Caius and Rose on ammunition charges and detained them for several hours until they realized that they screwed up. Now, while obviously Adam Hall and David Shalou are guilty, there's some oddities about Caius Veiovis that seem to imply could potentially be innocent. While looking deeper into him, a forensic scientist examined his black Jeep. It didn't look like it had been cleaned recently. Many areas inside and outside tested negative for blood. A few areas inside of the vehicle tested presumptively positive. This means that it was a very small amount. So the forensic scientists took samples from those areas for further testing. This failed to match any of the blood samples from the Jeep to any of the three men who were murdered. The investigators went to his old apartment and his new apartment to try and find something incriminating. In his old apartment, they found a collage on the wall consisting of illustrations that appeared to have been cut out of an anatomy book. They found a can of brake cleaner and some latex gloves. In his new apartment, they found several replica skulls and bones that appeared to be carved out of wood. In a bedroom, they found several knives, clevers, a machete, a sickle, a cattle prod, a bat with nails, other edged weapons, and several hatchets. This room's walls and windows were painted black. Honestly, this room kind of sounds like a dungeon, but also kind of cool. Inside of a metal box, they found a newspaper article from the September 6, 2011 edition of the Berkshire Eagle describing the disappearance of the three men. In another location in the room, they found an article dated September 8th that described the ongoing search for the missing men. Okay, this is a bit suspicious. The officers found some other things, but nothing worth noting, and they took none of the weapons because they all tested negative for blood. They did seize pins and patches affiliated with the Hells Angels, a pack of Black and Mild cigars, a list of phone numbers, and a bill of sale for his Jeep. During the search of his apartment, Caius was arrested on a numerous amount of charges. He was booked into jail and advised of his Miranda rights. When he was brought to the police station, he was told by a detective that they found the bodies and the charges were now upgraded to murder, kidnapping, and intimidation. The detective asked him to talk about Adam, and he said, "I didn't do anything. I'm not a rat." The detective then said, "Well, you're protecting a rat because Adam offered to set up the clubhouse to the FBI the year prior." Caius said that he's not a rat and won't cooperate. The detective then brought him back to his cell, which he shared with David Shalou. He said to Shalou, "Hey, you hear what they're saying about our partner? They're saying he's a stoolie." The police looked into his phone records and noticed that he wasn't active on his phone the entire day of Saturday, the 27th of August. On Friday, the 26th, there was one call between him and Adam Hall, and on Sunday, the 28th, there was barely any activity. Caius's girlfriend, Abigail Elwood, tried to call him at 12:09 and 1:40 in the morning on Sunday and left him 2 voicemails. He then called her back later in the day at around 8:14 p.m. There is zero physical evidence or forensic evidence that ties Caius to the crimes. He wasn't identified by any witnesses, he made no incriminating admissions, and the Commonwealth offered no evidence of consciousness of guilt. The conviction rested solely on the fact that he spent time with Adam and Shalou during the general time of the murders. Also, that he appeared to be tired on Sunday, he referred to Adam as our partner, and that he wanted to join the Hells Angels. In the end, Caius was found guilty on 3 counts of murder in the first degree, 3 counts of kidnapping, and 3 counts of witness intimidation. He was given life in prison without the possibility of parole. Here is how he replied.
When I was first arrested, the police made it clear to me that they did not actually believe I had anything to do with the disappearance and murder of these men, but that they did believe I possessed some knowledge that would greatly assist in their investigation. The threats and the promises were instantaneous and it was their expressed intent to put the squeeze on me. I've been in isolation for 3 years now. I've refused to talk to the cops. I've turned down all the numerous plea deals offered me from the beginning. Just 1 month before this trial began, D.A. Capos called my attorney, Gavin Reardon, and told him he knew I did not kill these men, but that he had in his head I was involved in the disposal of bodies. He offered me conspiracy after the fact, 7 years. I told my lawyer what I've told him and others many times before. My hand was not in this, and I will not let this man sell me my own hide at the price of my integrity. That I'd rather spend the rest of my life in prison and be able to face myself in the mirror at the end of the day to make that kind of deal. Now here we are today, and he's asking for 3 consecutive life sentences with no parole. Let me make this clear one more time before I sit down. My hand was not in this, all right? My hand wasn't in this. But if anybody thinks I'm going to hang my head today and beg for mercy, they're just as deluded in their thinking as that jury of my peers who convicted me of this. So, Your Honor, take your rubber stamp and do what you plan to do from the beginning. Justice was not served. I'm an innocent man. You condemn an innocent man, and I will heal this. Now, I'll see you all in hell, too. Remember that. Every one of you, I'll see you in hell.
I'm not saying he's innocent. He clearly was a bad person. But if they don't have any evidence at all that links him to the crime, how can he be found guilty? There's a lot of weird things about this case, but it's potentially something to look into. We can't take his personal interests and looks into account when trying to figure out if he's truly guilty or not. Looking at him, yeah, obviously, he looks like a demon straight out of hell, but looks only goes so far as face value, and so that's not truly a good determination. If he's truly guilty, keep him locked up, but if he's not, some people really screwed up. Also, as far as the whole Twilight thing goes, when this case started to gain a bit of notoriety, Caius came out and said this: "To whom it may or may not concern. Due to current circumstances, I have been cut off from access to the media. Though I do hear tell, and I hear that it has been printed, that I took my name from the movie Twilight. Pop culture inspires me to vomit hot blood, and I promise you I have never seen this silly movie. Nor have I read the book, nor would I ever, even now, waste my time with such useless drivel. My first and middle chosen names were inspired and taken from the great Roman emperors Caligula and Nero. My last from an ancient Etruscan demon. Anyone who knows me would have told you this. Suggest you check your sources. Caius Domitius Viovis. P.S. I would like to express my sincere condolences to the families involved in this tragic case. The deceased are not the only victims here." Honestly, he's got some really cool looking handwriting, but I think that answers that question. Adam Hall and David Chalou were both also found guilty on the same charges and both given life in prison. Good. In fact, I don't think that's a fair punishment. These two excuses for humans are the worst of the worst. Jail isn't even close to what they deserve, and words don't do justice. Adam Hall was a rat in every single way, even going against the motorcycle gang he claimed to be a part of. I hope he rots. David Chalou is on a website called meetaninmate.com where you can get a little bit of information about him and his P.O. box, etc. In this little paragraph, he goes on a rant about how he's exhausted his appeals on a wrongful conviction and that he's truly innocent and needs help to get out. Yeah, okay, buddy, you are a horrible person. Stay there. I'm not sure exactly how David Glasser and Adam Hall met each other. We know Adam referred to him as drummer Dave, and he also helped do things around Adam, so who knows? It's very upsetting to know that they crossed each other's paths, though, and what happened, happened. David was a quiet and gentle guy who loved rock and roll music. He enjoyed playing the drums and was overall just a good person. Whether or not he actually stole a carburetor or whatever from Adam is unknown. But even then, that's like, what, 25 to 50 bucks? He was genuinely harassed and basically tortured for over 2 years because of nothing. The police did nada to help him, and he went to them multiple times with concerns of Adam. It's crazy that they couldn't have put him into the witness protection program or something. They failed him very, very hard. David just wanted to have a good night watching the storm pass over with his two close friends and Not a single one of them was expecting that to be their last, especially in such a heinous, awful way. Edward Frampton was an active man who played basketball, and he loved to compete. He was an advocate for people with disabilities and gave presentations to help caregivers understand what they needed to do to help the people they would care for. Robert Chadwell was a caring man who loved camping, fishing, and the outdoors. He was a counselor in his local area for young men who were suffering from drug and alcohol addiction. He's remembered for having a big heart and being very generous, not only with his time, but with his care and love of others. He had weekly lunches with his mother Leslie, and she misses him greatly and their time spent together. I really hope that they're all resting peacefully and that their families or loved ones are able to find some peace. It's truly horrible to know that they all had to go through what they did. Words cannot fathom the way I feel about Adam Hall and David Chalou, mocking them in their last moments of desperation. Truly despicable human beings. Honestly. I also just wanted to say David Casey, the man who helped Adam bury the bodies, was also sentenced to 2.5 years. As to whether or not Caius is truly guilty, I have no idea. It's hard to say yes, and it's hard to say no. Some indicators point to him being guilty, however, there's zero evidence that he is. What do you think? But anyways, thank you for watching this episode of High Time Crime. If true crime is your thing, then please subscribe and hit the like button because that's all we do. I also have a second account with my brother named Horrifying where we tell stories about everything paranormal. This includes true crime, mysteries, and things that are just downright spooky. I'd greatly appreciate if you subscribe to that too. I hope you have a great rest of your day. Take care, friend.